A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Lena. From Lena's Romance Library. Chapter 1. The Night of the Sacrifice. The villagers had gathered at the edge of the forest, their breath clouding the cold night air. Torches flickered, painting their faces in shades of fire and shadow. The ancient ritual was older than anyone here. Older than the crumbling church. Older than the cobblestone streets that wound through the town like veins. It was a tradition whispered about, but never questioned, because those who questioned didn't live long. Isla Rowan stood at the center of the circle, her wrists bound with braided hemp, the rough fibers biting into her skin. She could feel every gaze burning into her, pity from some, indifference from most, and something uglier from a few. She kept her chin high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The elder's voice cracked like dry timber as he recited the words. On the 13th full moon, a life must be given to the forest. One to sate the king's hunger, and keep his wrath from our doors. The king. They said he ruled the shadowed woods. A creature not quite man, not quite beast. A Lycan, born from a curse older than memory. The villagers had offered sacrifices for centuries to keep him away. No one knew what became of those taken. No one asked. Isla's heartbeat was steady, but her breath was cold and sharp, burning in her lungs. She thought of her father's broken body lying in the barn last winter, slaughtered by something with claws too large to belong to any animal in these parts. The council had said it was a bear. She knew better. That was the night she stopped believing the sacrifices worked at all. Two men pushed her toward the black tree line. The moon hung heavy above them, swollen, silver, and merciless. The forest swallowed her whole in a breath. The night was alive with sounds, the low hiss of wind through pine needles, the crunch of snow beneath her boots, and somewhere far off, the echo of a howl. Not the thin, lonely call of a wolf. This was deeper, older. It vibrated in her bones. She walked for what felt like hours, guided only by moonlight spilling through the branches. The ropes cut into her wrists, and her shoulders ached, but she didn't cry out. She wouldn't die on her knees. When the sound came again, closer this time, she froze. Something moved between the trees, fast, silent, too large for the shadows to hide. She took a step back, heart hammering. It emerged without warning. A massive wolf, its coat black as midnight except for the faint silver streak running from its brow to the tip of its tail. Its eyes, golden, luminous, unblinking, locked on her. She'd seen wolves before, but nothing like this. This one radiated power, an authority that made the air itself seem to bow. Her instincts screamed to run, but some part of her knew that running would be useless. The wolf stepped forward, muscles rolling beneath its fur. Its paws barely disturbed the snow. "Come to finish the ritual?" she whispered, voice trembling despite her resolve. The wolf tilted its head, as if weighing her. Then, impossibly, it stepped closer and sniffed the rope around her wrists. Its hot breath ghosted over her skin. Isla held still. If it was going to kill her, she wanted to look it in the eye. The wolf's gaze shifted, softened. In one smooth motion, its massive jaw snapped, not at her, but at the ropes. The fibers split. The bonds fell away. Before she could react, the wolf turned sharply, ears pricking toward the dark. The sound of heavy footfalls and low growls rose from behind them. Shapes emerged between the trees, smaller wolves, but still massive, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. They spread out in a half circle, cutting off every path of escape. Isla's pulse spiked. The black wolf stepped in front of her, head low, a snarl ripping through the night. The pack hesitated, their growls faltering, Something passed between them. Something unspoken, but absolute. The intruders backed away, tails low, before melting back into the dark. The black wolf glanced at her once, golden eyes intense, and then... It was no longer a wolf. The transformation was silent, but shattering. Bones shifted. Fur melted into skin. The figure that stood before her now was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, his bare skin marked with scars like claw strikes. The silver streak that had run down the wolf's back was now a lock of hair falling across his forehead. He was beautiful in a way that didn't seem real. But there was danger in him too, in the sharp cut of his jaw, in the way he stood as if he owned the earth beneath their feet. And in those same golden eyes, unchanged by the shift. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice low and rough, as if unused to speaking. Isla swallowed hard. "Tell that to the ones who dragged me here." Something flickered in his gaze, not pity, but something close. "They gave you to me," he said, almost to himself. "But you're... different." "I'm not afraid of you," she lied. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You should be." For a moment, they stood in silence, the forest pressing close around them. Then he stepped back, as if making a decision. "You'll follow me," he said. "Or you won't make it through the night." She should have run. She should have fought. But something in her bones, in the pull of those golden eyes, told her that whatever danger waited deeper in the forest, it was nothing compared to what would happen if she stayed behind. Chapter 2. The Path. Through the shadows. The man moved through the forest as though it belonged to him, each step deliberate and silent despite the uneven ground. Isla followed because there was nowhere else to go, and because some primal part of her knew she was safer at his back than alone. Moonlight spilled in fractured silver patterns across his bare shoulders. The cold didn't seem to touch him. His pace was unhurried, but she had to work to keep up, her breath misting in the air, her boots crunching in the snow loud enough to betray her unease. They had been walking for minutes, maybe more, when she finally asked, "Where are you taking me?" He didn't slow, didn't look back. Away from the ones who would have finished what they started. "That pack," she pressed. "They were after me?" He glanced over his shoulder briefly. "They don't take what is claimed." The way he said it made her stomach twist. Claimed? By who? His eyes caught the moonlight, that same molten gold that had burned into her when he was a wolf. "By me." The words were not a request, not a boast. Just fact. Isla's breath hitched, but she said nothing. The trees thickened, their branches knitting together until the moonlight could barely seep through. Every shadow seemed to shift at the corner of her vision. He moved without hesitation, ducking under low limbs, stepping over hidden roots. Finally, the forest opened into a small clearing. A cabin sat at its center, built from dark, weathered timber. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of pine and something richer, meat roasting. She stopped at the edge of the clearing. "This is your home?" "For now," he said, pushing the heavy door open. "Inside." She hesitated, but the cold gnawed at her bones. When she stepped in, the heat hit her like a wave. A fire roared in the stone hearth, casting gold and orange light over the simple room. A table stood near the window, its surface scarred from years of use. Shelves lined the far wall, crowded with jars, bundles of herbs, and objects she couldn't name. He closed the door behind her, shutting out the night. For the first time, she could see him clearly. The man's face was cut from sharp lines. Cheekbones high, jaw strong, a mouth that seemed made for neither softness nor cruelty but could hold either. That streak of silver hair fell into his eyes until he pushed it back impatiently. He caught her looking. "You should sit," Her legs ached, so she obeyed, lowering herself into the chair nearest the fire. He moved to a pot suspended over the flames, stirred it, and ladled steaming broth into a clay bowl. "Eat," he said, setting it in front of her. She studied it suspiciously. "How do I know it's not poisoned?" One corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile, but not quite. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't be sitting here." Her stomach growled in answer. She picked up the wooden spoon and tasted. The broth was rich, smoky, and so warm it made her eyes sting. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been until heat started to seep back into her limbs. He leaned against the wall, watching her eat. Not hungrily, not even with curiosity. More like he was weighing her, measuring her against some unseen standard. Finally, she set the empty bowl down. "You saved me back there. Why?" "Because I chose to." "That's not an answer." He pushed away from the wall, stepping closer until the firelight flickered across the planes of his chest. "The truth," he said, "is dangerous. And I don't give it to strangers." "I'm not afraid of dangerous truths," she said before she could stop herself. His gaze sharpened, locking with hers until she felt as though he could see every thought she'd ever had. "You should be." The words were the same as before, but this time his tone was quieter, almost regretful. Silence stretched between them. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward. Finally, she asked, "Do you have a name?" He studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether to give it. "Kyle." "Kyle," she repeated softly, tasting the sound of it. It suited him, sharp and solid, like a blade. "And you?" he asked. "Isla Rowan." Something flickered across his face at her surname. Recognition, maybe. But it was gone before she could read it. "You should sleep," he said, turning toward a small door near the hearth. "There's a bed in there. I'll take the floor." She should have protested, should have told him she wasn't staying. But her body felt heavy, her thoughts slow, as if the forest had drained more from her than she'd realized. Still, she lingered in her chair, watching him as he pulled a blanket from the shelf. His movements were efficient, practiced. No wasted motion. "Why did the pack stop when you stood in front of me?" she asked finally. He paused, back still to her. "Because I'm not like them." The words hung in the air, heavy with meanings he didn't explain. When she finally lay in the narrow bed, she could hear him moving in the main room. The soft rustle of cloth, the quiet crackle of the fire. But beneath those sounds, she thought she heard something else. A heartbeat, steady, strong, too close. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Images flashed behind her eyelids. Golden eyes in the dark, the heat of his body close to hers, the way the others had backed away from him as if from a king. Somewhere outside, a wolf howled. She didn't know whether it was calling to him or warning her. Chapter 3. Shadows between them. Isla woke to the faint smell of pine smoke and the sound of something moving outside the cabin. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed beneath her was too soft for the hard floors of home, the air too warm for the bitter cold of the forest. Then memory returned. The torchlight of the village, the black wolf with golden eyes. Kale's silent figure leading her through the trees. She pushed herself up. The small room was empty now, the door to the main space ajar. Firelight flickered through the gap, casting a shifting glow on the floorboards. When she stepped out, Kale wasn't inside. The door to the cabin hung slightly open, letting in a thread of icy air. She moved to it, careful not to make noise. Through the gap, she saw him. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, bare-chested despite the cold, his head tilted as though listening to something far away. His breath rose in faint clouds. Every muscle in his body was drawn taut, ready. Then she heard it too, a low rumble, almost like distant thunder, but sharper. A growl. Kale's hands curled into fists. The sound seemed to pass, fading into the forest. Slowly, he turned back toward the cabin, and for an instant she thought she saw his eyes catch the moonlight. Too bright, too gold to be natural. By the time he stepped inside, his expression was unreadable. "You shouldn't stand near the door at night." "What was that?" she asked, her voice sharper than she meant. "Nothing you need to worry about." That's not an answer. He closed the door and latched it. "It's the only one you're getting." The rest of the morning passed in a strange quiet. Kyle moved around the cabin with easy efficiency, tending the fire, setting a kettle on to boil, slicing meat with a knife that gleamed like polished silver. Isla stayed near the hearth, watching him work, trying to fit the fragments she knew into a shape that made sense. Finally, she said, "You live out here alone?" He glanced up, brow lifting. "You sound surprised." "It's isolated." "That's the point." She hesitated. "Because you're hiding?" The corner of his mouth ticked upward. "Because I prefer it." But the way he said it made her think it wasn't the whole truth. By midday, the clouds thickened, turning the light outside into a dim gray haze. Kyle stepped to the window, scanning the trees. "A storm's coming. You shouldn't be near the forest when it hits." She gave a humorless laugh. "I wasn't exactly planning to take a walk." His eyes met hers. Storms bring more than wind and snow. They stir things up. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver through her. The hours stretched. She found herself restless, pacing the small cabin. "Do you hunt?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from real curiosity. Kale glanced from the table where he was sharpening his blade. "Sometimes." "For food?" His gaze didn't waver. "For other reasons." "And last night? Was that hunting?" A long pause. Then, "Last night was protecting." "Me?" He didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. That evening, the wind began to rise, rattling the branches against the roof. The fire crackled, but the air inside felt tense, heavy. Isla sat on the chair by the hearth, watching Kale stretch a pelt near the wall. "Why did you stop them?" she asked suddenly. His hands stilled. "Because they would have killed you." "And you didn't want that?" "No." "Why?" He looked at her then. Really looked, as though the question itself was dangerous. "Because I've buried enough innocence." The words caught her off guard. "Who?" He returned his attention to the pelt. "People who trusted the wrong person. People who crossed the wrong pack." The word pack made her skin prickle. "And you? Which one are you?" For a heartbeat, she thought he might answer. But then he said only, "Neither." The wind howled outside, making the cabin creak. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "So, what happens now?" "You wait out the storm. Then you go back to your village." She blinked. "You think they'll let me back in? After they tied me up and sent me here?" Something in his jaw tightened. "Then you'll find another place. Somewhere they can't touch you." "And you? You'll just disappear back into the forest?" "That's what I do." Her pulse quickened, though she couldn't have said why. "I'm not sure I believe you're the type to disappear." His mouth curved slightly. "And what type do you think I am?" She opened her mouth and realized she didn't have an answer. That night, she couldn't sleep. The storm roared outside, and in its voice she thought she heard other sounds. Sharp, violent crashes, like bodies moving fast through the snow. More than once she swore she heard howls rising in the distance. When she crept to the main room, Kale was gone. The door was shut tight, but the cold that leaked in told her it had been opened recently. She waited, heart pounding until she heard it. Heavy footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. The latch lifted, and Cale stepped in. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, his chest rising and falling as though he'd run for miles. He froze when he saw her awake. "Where were you?" she asked. "Keeping the storm from bringing wolves to the door." Her eyes narrowed. "And you expect me to believe you fought off a pack by yourself?" Kyle stepped closer, the scent of cold air and pine clinging to him. "I don't care what you believe, Isla. Only that you're alive to keep believing it." Something in his voice, fierce, almost possessive, caught her off balance. She wanted to press him, demand the truth, but instead, she said nothing. Later, as she lay back in bed, she thought of the way he'd stood in the doorway, snow melting into his skin, golden eyes burning even in the dim firelight, and she wondered how much longer she could pretend not to know the truth she already felt in her bones. That Cale was not entirely human, and whatever he was, he had claimed her. Chapter 4. The Storm's Confession. The wind had been relentless through the night, clawing at the cabin walls as if it wanted in. By morning, the snow was piled high against the door, sealing them inside. The air held a heavy stillness, the kind that came when the world outside was buried deep under winter's grip. Kyle was already up, feeding more wood to the fire. His movements were silent, efficient. Isla sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, watching him in the flicker of light. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. "I don't need as much as most," he replied without looking at her. "That's not an answer." A faint smirk ghosted his lips. "You've noticed I don't give many of those." She rose and crossed the room, standing near enough to feel the heat from the fire. "I notice a lot of things." Finally, his gaze lifted to meet hers. "And what have you noticed about me?" Her breath caught. The truth came easier than she expected. That you're always listening to something I can't hear. That you move like you're hunting even when you're not. And that you keep putting yourself between me and danger, whether you admit it or not. Something unreadable passed through his golden eyes. "You make that sound like a flaw." "It's not," she said softly. "It's confusing." The silence stretched, warm and taut. Cale turned back to the fire, but his voice was low when he spoke again. "You shouldn't try to understand me, Isla. You'll only find reasons to run." "Maybe I'm tired of running." He stilled at that, as if weighing her words. Then he crossed to the table and picked up a length of leather cord, working it between his hands. "If you're going to stay here until the storm passes, you should know some things." Her pulse quickened. "Like what?" "Like the rules." Her brow furrowed. "Rules?" He nodded once. "Don't open the door after dark, ever. If you hear howling close, stay away from the windows. And if I tell you to hide..." His eyes locked on hers. "You hide. No questions." The weight in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. "That's a strange way to treat a guest." "That's a strange word for what you are here," he said evenly. She sat at the table, resting her chin in her hands. "And what am I here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured her water from a clay jug, set it in front of her, then leaned against the wall as if putting distance between them was safer. "Someone the village was willing to throw away. Someone I wasn't willing to see torn apart." Her chest tightened. "Why? You don't even know me." Cale's jaw flexed. "I know enough." There was something in his voice, a shadow of grief maybe, that made her want to push further, but before she could, the wind outside shifted, bringing with it a faint, distant sound. A howl. Cale froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid, his head turning toward the sound. It was long, mournful, and too close. "Stay here," he said sharply. "Wait." But he was already moving, crossing to the door in 3 strides. He pulled on a heavy fur cloak, his knife sliding into the loop at his hip. "Kale." She tried again, but the look he gave her stopped her cold. It wasn't anger, it was warning. Then he was gone, swallowed by the blizzard. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. The storm howled, and more than once she thought she heard shapes moving just beyond the walls. Shadows flickered past the window, too tall, too fast to be tricks of the light. Finally, the door burst open. Kale stepped inside, snow crusted on his cloak, his breath harsh. A fresh gash ran along his forearm, dark against his skin. "Are you hurt?" she blurted, rushing toward him. "It's nothing," he said, brushing past her. She caught his arm before he could pull away. "That's not nothing." His gaze dropped to where her hand gripped him. For a moment, neither moved. Then he let out a slow breath, letting her guide him to the table. She tore a strip from an old cloth and began cleaning the wound. "Who did this?" Kale's eyes narrowed. "Not who. What?" The words sent a chill through her. "And what was it?" He didn't answer, just watched her hands work. When she glanced up, she found his expression softened, still guarded, but with something else beneath it. "You've done this before," he said quietly. "My father." Her voice caught. "He worked with animals, injured ones. I helped." Kyle was silent for a moment, then said, "You're steady. Most people shake when they're this close. Maybe I should be more afraid." "Maybe." When she finished binding his arm, he flexed it experimentally. "You did well?" She sat back, suddenly aware of how close they were. "I want to know the truth, Kale. About you. About what's out there." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping low. "The truth is not something you can unhear, Isla. And once you have it, it changes you. There's no going back." Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she didn't look away. "Then change me." For a long moment, he studied her, the firelight casting sharp planes across his face. Then he stood, breaking the moment. "Not yet." Disappointment flickered in her chest, but she didn't press. "Not tonight." Chapter 5. Teeth in the Snow. The storm did not loosen its grip by morning. If anything, it had grown harsher, its wind carrying a strange, high-pitched whine that threaded through the air like a warning. Kyle was already at the door when Isla woke, fastening the heavy latch as though it might be tested. His shoulders were tense, his movements sharp. "Something's moving in the snow," he said without preamble. "More than one." Her stomach tightened. "Wolves?" He shook his head once, but the look he gave her said she wouldn't want the right answer. "Stay away from the windows." She moved to speak, but he was already pulling on the fur-lined cloak and checking the blade at his hip. The leather was worn smooth at the hilt from long use. "Kale?" "I'll be back before dark." His voice was clipped, but when he looked at her, there was a flicker of something else. The same warning-laced protectiveness she'd felt from him since the night they met. "If I'm not, you know what to do." She didn't, not really, but she nodded anyway. The cabin felt too big without him, every creak of the wood sounding louder. She kept herself busy tending the fire and retying the bandage on his arm, though she suspected he'd hate knowing she'd touched it. By midday, the sky had darkened again, though the day wasn't nearly over. The wind carried faint sounds, not quite howls, not quite human cries. She forced herself to stay away from the windows, but her imagination painted what might be out there. When the noise came, a heavy thud against the outer wall. She froze. The sound came again, closer to the door this time. Something scratched at the wood, the sound sharp and deliberate. Her breath came shallow. She glanced toward the iron poker leaning by the hearth. The scratching stopped. Silence pressed in. Then the latch moved. The door jolted, the latch straining against something pulling from the other side. She grabbed the poker, heart hammering. "Kale?" she called, hating the tremor in her voice. No answer. The door rattled again, harder. The latch held, but a low growl seeped through the gap, vibrating in her bones. It was deeper than any wolf's call, edged with something unnatural. Isla backed toward the hearth, forcing herself not to turn her back completely on the door. Her mind raced. The rules he'd given her. Don't open the door after dark. Stay away from the windows. If I tell you to hide. The latch groaned again, bending under the strain. Something struck the door hard enough to make the frame shudder. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. For a long moment she heard nothing but her own ragged breathing. Then came the crunch of footsteps through snow. Heavy, deliberate, circling the cabin. She tightened her grip on the poker. The sound reached the far wall. Then the back window, the one Kale had warned her about. A shadow moved across it. The glass fogged, as though something had leaned close enough to breathe on it. Her pulse roared in her ears. And then, from the trees beyond the clearing, came another sound. A roar, low and furious, that she knew instantly. Kyle. The shadow vanished from the glass. Outside, the sounds collided. The snap of branches, the crunch of snow under bodies, snarls so deep they rattled her chest. She stayed frozen in place until the noise began to fade, moving away from the cabin. She didn't realize she was still gripping the poker until her hand ached. Minutes, or maybe hours, later, the door opened. Kyle stepped inside, his cloak torn, snow streaking his hair. His eyes burned gold in the dim light, brighter than before. He was breathing hard, his jaw clenched. She dropped the poker. "What was that?" "Nothing that will come back tonight." "Don't lie to me," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Kyle's gaze snapped to hers. For a moment, he looked as if he might unleash the truth, all of it. Instead, he closed the door and leaned against it, snow melting down his bare forearms. "You're alive," he said finally, his voice low. "That's all that matters right now." She crossed the room before she could think better of it, her hands hovering near the tear in his cloak. "You're hurt again." He caught her wrist, not hard, but firm. His skin was warm despite the snow clinging to him. "I told you before, I can take it." "I'm starting to think you take more than you should," she said softly. Something flickered in his expression. Frustration, maybe, but not at her. "It's not me I'm worried about." Her breath caught. "Then tell me what I'm up against." For a long moment, Kale didn't move. His golden eyes searched hers, as though weighing what she could carry. "You wouldn't believe me," he said finally. "Try me." Instead of answering, he stepped past her to the fire, stripping the wet cloak from his shoulders. The muscles in his back shifted as he moved, and she caught sight of scars along his ribs. Some long and thin like claw marks, others round and jagged as if teeth had torn them. She swallowed hard. Those weren't from hunting, were they? His silence was answer enough. When he finally turned, his voice was low but steady. "There are rules to the forest, Isla. Some of them keep you alive. Some of them keep me alive. If I break them, neither of us will see another winter." "You already broke one," she said quietly. His brow furrowed. "Which?" "You let me live." The words seemed to hang in the air between them. Kyle's jaw tightened, but there was no anger in his eyes. Only something older, heavier. "That wasn't a mistake." Her pulse quickened. heat rising in her chest despite the cold. She wanted to press him, to ask why, but the truth hovered too close to the surface now, fragile as ice. Instead, she stepped back. Then I guess I'll stop asking for answers you're not ready to give. Kale's mouth curved slightly, not in amusement, but in something like respect. Outside, the wind howled again, but this time it felt different, as though the storm wasn't the only thing circling them. Chapter 6. The night they crossed the line. By the next evening, the storm had calmed, leaving the forest draped in a thick, muffled silence. The air was so still it felt like holding a breath, waiting for something to happen. Kyle had gone out earlier, saying only that he needed to check the perimeter. Isla stayed behind, pacing the cabin in slow circles. The quiet pressed on her ears until every pop from the hearth made her jump. When the door finally opened, Kyle stepped in with a dusting of snow across his boots. His eyes swept the cabin once, sharp, assessing, before softening just enough to meet hers. "All clear?" she asked. "For now." He set down the satchel he carried, spilling out a few strips of dried meat and 2 small jars of honey. "Trade from an old contact." "You have contacts?" "I have people who owe me," he said simply. They ate by the fire, the crackle of flames the only sound for a long while. She found herself studying the way the light played across his face, the faint crease between his brows, the sharp cut of his cheekbones, the way those golden eyes seemed to catch and hold the light longer than they should. "You keep watching me," he said without looking up. "You keep being hard not to watch." The words slipped out before she could stop them. His mouth curved slightly. "Careful?" "Of what?" "Of wanting to know me more than is safe." Her spoon hovered in midair. "And if I already do?" That made him finally look at her. Not with surprise, but with something heavier, like he was measuring the cost of letting her stay in his orbit. When the knock came, it wasn't polite. 3 sharp raps, hard enough to rattle the wood. Kyle was on his feet instantly, all traces of ease gone. His body went still, his head tilting in that uncanny way he had when listening. "Go to the back room," he said. "Kale? Now, Isla?" His voice left no room for argument. She moved toward the small bedroom, but the latch clicked before she reached it. The door creaked open a fraction, letting in a slice of moonlight, and a low, rumbling growl. Kyle was there in a heartbeat, slamming it shut so fast the frame shook. The growl deepened, followed by another from somewhere off to the side. "They followed me," he muttered, almost to himself. "Who?" His eyes flicked toward her, burning gold even in the dim. The kind who don't leave witnesses. The pounding began, not just on the door now but along the walls, as if something circled the cabin, testing for a weak point. A shadow swept past the window. Too big for a wolf, too fast for a man. Cal shoved the table against the door, his movements quick, precise. "Stay behind me." She did, but her heart hammered so hard it hurt. The air seemed charged, the hairs on her arms rising. Outside, the growls grew into snarls, closer, sharper. Then came the sound of splitting wood from the back wall. Kale moved faster than she'd ever seen him, crossing the cabin in a blur. His shoulders rolled forward, muscles tightening like something coiled inside him was about to break free. The wall gave way with a crack, splintering inward. Through the gap, something pushed, a muzzle, teeth bared, eyes catching the firelight in an eerie silver flash. Kyle stepped between her and the opening, his voice low but lethal. "You shouldn't have come here." The creature lunged, and Kale met it head-on. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw his form ripple, like heat bending air, and his fingers lengthened into something too sharp, too clawed to be human. The fight was brutal and fast. He moved with impossible precision, his body a blur of strength and violence. claws met claws, teeth snapped, and the air filled with the scent of blood and snow. One attacker broke away, vanishing into the night. The other followed after a final snarl, leaving Kale standing in the ruin of the wall, his chest rising and falling like he'd just held back an ocean. Isla stared at him, her back pressed to the far wall. "Kale, what are you?" He turned, the gold in his eyes still burning too bright, his breath still too deep. "Not something you're ready to hear. I just saw... You saw enough to know why I keep the rules I do." His voice was steady, but there was strain in it, as if he were holding something back with sheer force of will. She stepped forward, her pulse a wild drumbeat. "You could have let them take me. You didn't. Why?" His gaze locked on hers. "Because they don't get to decide what happens to you. I do." The words sent a strange heat through her, equal parts fear and something else she didn't want to name. He moved to the damaged wall, shoving broken planks into place just enough to keep the cold out for now. The scent of blood lingered in the air, some of it theirs, some of it his. "You're hurt again," she said. "It will heal." "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint ring of darker gold around his pupils, the way his breathing slowed as if matching hers. "You'll get answers," he said finally, "but not until I can be sure they won't kill you to keep them." She nodded, though she knew it wasn't really agreement. The truth was out there now, circling them like the predators in the snow, and sooner or later, it would get inside. Chapter 7. The Edge of the Truth. By morning, the wind had died, but the cabin felt colder somehow. The patch Kale had made in the broken wall was rough, the edges still letting in slivers of icy air. Outside, the forest lay in perfect stillness, as if the night's violence had never happened. Isla sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone lukewarm. She could hear Kale moving outside, the crunch of boots in snow, the scrape of wood as he hauled new planks to mend the wall properly. When he returned, his breath misted in the air, a few strands of his hair damp with melting frost. He dropped the lumber by the hearth and began working without a word. "You're not going to talk about it?" she asked. He didn't look up. "About what?" "About what happened last night," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. His hammer struck the wood once, hard. "You saw enough." "That's not the same as knowing." Kale paused, resting his hands on the plank. "And what exactly do you think you saw?" She met his gaze, steady despite the thrum of her heartbeat. "Something that's not human. Not entirely. Something strong enough to fight those things and fast enough to make me question whether I blinked or you vanished between steps." The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, more like the faintest acknowledgement. "Not bad, for someone guessing in the dark." "Then stop making me guess." His golden eyes held hers for a long moment before he set the hammer down. "There's a difference between curiosity and survival, Isla. You're standing too close to the line." She pushed her chair back, standing. "And if I don't care about the line?" "You should," he said quietly. Something about his tone made her pause. Not fear, but weight. As if every word carried the memory of someone who hadn't cared and hadn't lived to regret it. "Is that what happened to the people you've buried?" she asked. The muscle in his jaw tightened. "Some of them." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint pop of the fire. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the faint scrapes along his knuckles from the fight. "You said you claimed me," she murmured. "What does that mean?" His gaze flicked to her mouth before returning to her eyes. "It means the forest knows you're mine. And anything that tries to take you has to go through me first." Heat flooded her chest, but she kept her voice steady. That sounds more like a threat than protection. It's both. The words hung between them, charged. Kyle broke the moment first, returning to the task of securing the wall. You'll need to decide soon whether you want to go back to your village when the storm paths clear. She laughed without humor. You think they'll take me back after sending me here as a sacrifice? That's why I'm giving you a choice. Stay, and the forest becomes your cage. Leave, and... He trailed off. And what? Kale's eyes met hers. And I can't follow you where they'll take you. Her stomach nodded. Why not? Because there are rules, Ela. Rules about territory. Rules about blood. That last word lingered in the air, thick and heavy. She swallowed hard. You're telling me without telling me. That's the best I can do until I know you understand the cost. They worked together the rest of the day, mending the wall, restocking wood, and clearing snow from the roof. She noticed the way Kale scanned the tree line every few minutes, his movements never quite relaxed. It wasn't paranoia. It was vigilance, honed and constant. By the time the sun dipped low, the cabin was secure again. Kyle lit a second lantern, its warm glow softening the shadows. Storm's done, he said. But the forest isn't quiet yet. She tilted her head. I thought it was silent all day. It's the wrong kind of silence. That night, sleep came fitfully. She dreamed of golden eyes in the dark, of claws flashing in moonlight, of something vast and unseen moving through the trees. When she woke, the fire had burned low, and Kale was sitting in the chair by the hearth, awake and watching the window. You don't sleep much, she said softly. He didn't look at her. I don't like what hunts in my dreams. The words caught her off guard. Is that why you're out here? Alone? His lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't deny it. The air between them shifted then, something unspoken drawing her toward him. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and moved to stand near the fire. Kale, whatever you are, whatever you're hiding, you've kept me alive when you didn't have to. I just need you to know I'm not going to run. His gaze finally met hers, something fierce and conflicted burning there. Don't make promises you can't keep, Isla. This world... He broke off, shaking his head. It doesn't forgive. Neither do I, she whispered. They stayed like that for a long time, the firelight flickering between them, the unspoken truths pressing close. Outside, far in the trees, a howl rose. Not the sharp, wild call of a wolf, but something deeper, older, and too much like the sound Kale had made when he drove the attackers away. He stood slowly, his eyes catching the light just enough for her to see the gold in them flare. Go back to bed, he said, his voice lower now, almost rough. Tomorrow, I'll give you more of the truth. And for the first time since she'd stepped into his world, Isla believed he meant it. Chapter 8. The shape of the truth. The morning came pale and brittle, light filtering through a sky the color of old steel. Frost clung to the windows in fragile patterns, the kind that would shatter at a touch. Isla woke to the faint scrape of Kale's boots across the cabin floor. You're up early, she murmured, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Didn't sleep, he said simply, sliding the bolt on the door. I told you I'd give you more of the truth today. The way he said it, deliberate, measured, made her pulse pick up. She sat up straighter. I'm listening. His eyes caught hers for a long moment before he moved to the table, placing a map across its surface. It was crude, drawn in dark ink and marked with jagged lines. This is the forest, he said, his fingertip tracing a circle around their location. It's older than your village, older than the roads leading to it. There are borders here, not the kind you see, but the kind you feel. Territory, she guessed. He inclined his head. Yes, and every piece of it belongs to someone. Or something. She leaned closer, scanning the marks. And yours? Kyle's finger tapped the clearing where the cabin sat. This is mine. Not because I claimed it, but because I'm bound to it. Bound, she repeated. Like magic? Like blood, he said, the word heavy. Her throat tightened. Is that what you meant by rules? By not being able to follow me if I left? Yes. His gaze didn't waver. Once I cross into another's territory, it's a challenge, and challenges end in blood. She sat back, trying to piece it together. The night the village sent me, they weren't just feeding you to the woods. They were giving me to you. Kale's jaw flexed. They thought they were. But their kind of giving isn't mine. I don't take unwilling prey. The word prey landed between them like a weight. You keep saying I'm claimed, she said, her voice low. But not why. For the first time, something in his expression softened. Not much, but enough to make her chest ache. Because the moment I saw you, I knew letting them take you would be wrong. And because there's something in you, the forest would tear apart if I didn't stand in its way. Her breath came quicker now. Something in me? Kyle hesitated, then shook his head. Not yet. She almost protested, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Not defiance, not secrecy, but protection. Then show me the part you can tell, she said. He studied her for a long moment, then stepped back from the table. Come with me. The air outside bit at her skin, the snow bright enough to sting her eyes. Kyle led her past the clearing's edge, deeper into the trees where the light thinned and the world grew quieter. They stopped in a hollow where the snow lay untouched. Kyle turned to face her. You've seen pieces of what I am, he said, but pieces can lie. I'm giving you the truth without the words. Before she could ask what he meant, his body began to change. It wasn't violent, not the way she'd imagined. It was fluid, a ripple through muscle and bone, a shiver through the air. His skin darkened into fur, black threaded with silver. His shoulders widened, his form stretching until the man she knew was gone, replaced by something towering and feral. Not a wolf. Not a man. Both. The Lycan's golden eyes locked on her, the same eyes she had met in the forest the night of the sacrifice. And though his size was terrifying, claws glinting, teeth catching the pale light, she felt no urge to run. He stepped closer, the snow crunching beneath paws larger than her hands. His head dipped until his breath warmed her face. Kyle, she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough. The Lycan's gaze softened, a strange, impossible thing for a beast to do. Before the change took him back, fur melting into skin, claws shrinking to fingers. Kale stood before her again, breathing slow, watching for her reaction. You're not afraid, he said. She exhaled, only then realizing she'd been holding the breath. Should I be? His mouth curved slightly, though not in amusement. Yes, but not of me. Her voice came quieter now. Then of what? He looked past her, to the deeper shadows of the forest. Of the ones who want what I've claimed. Because now that they've seen you in my territory, they'll come again. And next time, they won't just test the walls. They walked back to the cabin in silence, her mind a storm of questions. She'd expected fear, or at least disbelief. But instead there was something else rising in her. A strange steadiness, as if the truth had always been circling her, and now simply had a name. Inside, Kale poured water into a pot, setting it over the fire. You still have a choice, he said. Leave when the snow thins, or stay and accept that your life will never belong to the village again. Her pulse was still racing from what she'd seen, but her voice was steady. And if I stay? He met her gaze across the firelight. Then you're mine. In every way the forest understands. Something in her chest tightened. Not from fear, but from the pull she'd been feeling since the moment he'd cut her ropes that first night. That night, she didn't sleep much. Every creak of the cabin, every sigh of wind through the pines sounded sharper, closer. She thought of his golden eyes in the snow, of the way the forest seemed to hold its breath around him. And for the first time, she wondered if fate hadn't brought her here as a sacrifice, but as a challenge. Chapter 9. The distance between us. The morning after Kale's reveal, the air in the cabin felt different. Taut, as if the truth he'd shown her had filled the space with something neither of them knew how to carry. Isla sat at the table, staring into a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She could still see him in the snow, the way his body had shifted, the impossible blend of man and beast. Her mind kept replaying it, not with fear, but with an almost dangerous fascination. Kyle moved around the room with the same measured efficiency as always, but there was a new distance in it. He didn't meet her eyes unless he had to. He didn't sit, didn't pause to speak. You've barely said 2 words to me since yesterday, she said finally. He stopped by the fire, turning a log with the poker. You've seen enough to know why I can't keep you here. The words hit harder than she expected. What does that mean? It means the forest will take notice now. They'll know you've seen me in my true form. He set the poker down, his voice hardening. It puts you in more danger than you were before. Isla rose from the table. You think I don't understand the risk? I think you don't understand the scale, he replied without looking at her. There are packs older than your village, bloodlines bound to the moon's pull in ways you can't imagine. Some will see you as leverage, others will see you as prey. Either way, keeping you here is a mistake. Her hands curled into fists. And what's your plan? Send me back to the people who tied me up and left me for dead? Kyle's jaw tightened. I can send you beyond them. To a place where neither the village nor the forest can reach you. She took a step toward him. And you? His eyes finally lifted to hers, and for a moment, she saw the conflict there. Something fierce straining against something equally unyielding. I stay here. It's the only way to keep the border from breaking. The words landed like a stone in her chest. So that's it? I see what you are, and now you push me away? Kyle's gaze didn't falter, but there was something raw in it now. If I keep you here, I can't promise you'll survive. If I let you go, you might hate me for it. But you'll live. Silence stretched, filled only by the low crackle of the fire. Isla felt the pull between them like a rope drawn tight. The urge to fight him for control of her fate, and the urge to close the space between them and erase the distance in his voice. I'm not leaving, she said finally, each word deliberate. His jaw flexed. You don't get to make that call. I already did the moment I walked into these woods and didn't run, she shot back. I've been hunted, nearly torn apart, and I've seen you fight things that shouldn't exist. And I'm still here. Doesn't that tell you something? For a heartbeat, Kale just stared at her, the gold in his eyes catching the firelight. Then he turned away, as if looking at her any longer might make him change his mind. The rest of the day passed in a heavy quiet. Kyle kept himself busy outside, chopping wood, reinforcing the patched wall, checking the perimeter like a man who needed movement to avoid thinking. Isla stayed inside, but her thoughts were anything but still. When he returned at dusk, his cloak was damp from snow, and there was a fresh cut along his jaw. You're hurt again, she said, moving toward him. "It's nothing," he replied automatically. She reached up before he could step away, her fingers brushing the edge of the wound. "You keep saying that. But it's not nothing to me." For a moment, he didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then, gently but firmly, he took her hand and lowered it from his face. "You don't understand what you're asking for," he said quietly. "Then explain it to me," she urged. He shook his head once, stepping back. "If I tell you everything, it binds you to me in ways you can't undo. You won't be able to go back, not to your old life, not to anything else. And the forest will know it." Her chest ached at the finality in his tone. "Maybe I don't want to go back." His eyes darkened, the gold burning hotter. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I do." The air between them felt charged, every heartbeat loud in the silence. For a moment she thought he might close the space between them. Instead, he turned and busied himself with the fire again, the moment slipping away like snow through her fingers. That night, Isla lay awake, listening to the soft, steady rhythm of his breathing from the other side of the room. She thought about the way he'd looked when he shifted, about the way his voice had gone quiet when he'd told her she couldn't stay. Somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her safety. There was something in him, some fear, some memory, that made him believe pushing her away was the only way to protect her. And she wasn't sure which was more dangerous, the threats in the forest, or the walls he kept building between them. Chapter 10. When the shadows came. The air shifted that night. Isla could feel it, a subtle pressure, like the forest itself had drawn closer. Even inside the cabin, with the fire warm and steady, the hairs along her arms lifted as if some unseen gaze had fixed on them. Cale noticed it too. He kept glancing toward the windows, his movements slower, more deliberate. The usual quiet he carried had changed. It wasn't distance now. It was vigilance sharpened to a blade. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set a second log on the fire and straightened, listening. "Something's moving out there, close enough to scent us." A flicker of unease went through her. "The same ones from before?" "Not exactly." His gaze locked on hers. "Stay near the hearth. Don't move unless I tell you." The knock, when it came, was soft, almost polite. It was worse than the pounding from before. At least that had been honest. This sound was deliberate, controlled, meant to make you lean in instead of back away. Cale crossed to the door in 2 steps, his body angled to shield her from the view through the narrow seam of wood. "Who's there?" His voice was low, dangerous. A pause, then a voice, male, deep, with a strange cadence to it, as if the words had been learned rather than lived. "We've come for what's ours." Every muscle in Kyle's back went rigid. "She isn't yours." "You can't keep her," the voice replied, still calm, still wrong. "The claiming was never yours to make." The sound of snow crunching came from just beyond the door. More than one set of footsteps now. Isla's pulse climbed. Kyle glanced over his shoulder, his golden eyes lit by the firelight. "Get in the back room, now." She hesitated. "Cale." His voice sharpened, low but absolute. "Go." She obeyed, retreating to the small room and shutting the door, but she didn't stay still. She pressed her ear to the wood, straining to catch the words outside. "You cross my line and you leave in pieces," Cale was saying. "And if we refuse?" the stranger asked. There was a pause. Then Cale's voice, quiet enough to make her shiver. "Then you find out why they call me the Black Fang." The next sound wasn't words. It was movement, sudden, violent, the heavy impact of bodies colliding. Something slammed into the wall hard enough to make dust shake from the beams. Isla's instincts screamed at her to stay hidden, but the thought of Kale alone out there with whoever, whatever, was at the door burned hotter than her fear. She pushed the door open just enough to see the main room. Kale moved like shadow and fire, faster than the eye could track, every strike deliberate. The one closest to him was massive, furred, its eyes glowing an unnatural red. Another crouched near the broken wall from before, waiting for an opening. One lunged. Kale met it mid-air, the ripple of his shift shuddering through the room. His arms became something more, claws, muscle, raw power, as he drove the attacker back toward the door. Isla grabbed the iron poker from near the hearth without thinking. When the second creature slipped toward the side, angling for her, she swung with every ounce of strength she had. The iron connected with a sickening crack, sending it reeling. Kyle caught sight of her, fury flashing in his eyes. "I told you to stay—" "Not happening," she shot back, breathless. The distraction cost him. The first creature slammed into him, driving them both toward the far wall. The woods splintered under the impact, the whole cabin seeming to groan. Something in Isla broke at the sight. She didn't think. She moved, bringing the poker down hard on the creature's skull. It snarled, turning its rage on her. It never reached her. Kale's roar shook the air, deeper and more primal than anything she'd heard from him before. He tore the attacker away, his claws raking deep. The thing crumpled to the floor and didn't rise again. The other fled into the snow, its strange red eyes fading into the night. For a long moment, only the sound of Kale's breathing filled the space. He was still half-shifted, the fur along his arms matted with blood, his chest rising and falling in sharp pulls. Isla stood frozen, the poker still in her grip, her heart hammering. Kale's gaze found hers, and the heat in it was almost unbearable. "You could have been killed." "And you could have," she shot back, her voice shaking. "I wasn't going to sit in the dark while they tore you apart." The gold in his eyes softened, but the intensity didn't fade. Slowly he crossed the space between them, his claws receding, his form returning to the man she knew. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the wildness still clinging to his breath. "You don't listen," he murmured, but there was no anger in it now. "Not when it comes to you," she said quietly. Something shifted in his expression then, a crack in the wall he'd been holding between them. His hand lifted, almost hesitating before brushing a streak of ash from her cheek. "You don't know what that means," he said, voice rough. "Then teach me," she replied. The moment stretched, balanced on the edge of something neither of them seemed ready to name. Then Kale stepped back, drawing in a slow breath. "They won't stop now," he said. "Not until one of us is dead. Or bound." Her pulse quickened. "Bound?" His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. The only thing the forest respects more than blood is a bond. Chapter 11. The weight of a bond. The cabin was quieter now, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that comes after a fight, when the blood hasn't yet cooled and the air still hums with what might return. Isla sat at the table, her fingers curled loosely around the iron poker. She hadn't put it down since the attack. Across from her, Kale crouched by the hearth, the firelight painting sharp lines across his face. He was watching the flames, but his words were meant for her. "A bond," he said slowly, "isn't just a promise. It's a tie written into your bones. It marks you as mine, and me as yours. The forest recognizes it, the packs respect it, but it comes with a price." "What kind of price?" she asked, her voice quieter than she meant. He glanced at her, the gold in his eyes dimmer now, more like embers than flame. "It means your fate is no longer yours alone. What happens to me, happens to you." She let that settle between them. And what happens to you, Kyle? His mouth twitched, not in humor, but in something closer to bitterness. I've bled more years than I've lived in peace. Every pack within 50 miles would rather see me buried than breathing. That's what you'd be tying yourself to. Isla straightened. You're asking me to be afraid. I'm telling you to be sure. The fire popped, sending a thin thread of smoke curling upward. Kale's gaze returned to the flames. In my world, bonds aren't made lightly. They can't be broken. Not by will, not by distance. Only by death. He said the last word without flinching, but she felt the weight of it settle in her chest. And if I agreed? She asked. Kyle's hands flexed against his knees. Then no one could take you from me, not without challenging me outright, and they'd have to kill me to win. She swallowed. And if they did? His eyes met hers, steady, unblinking. Then you'd die with me. The silence after that was deep enough to hear the faint hiss of melting snow sliding down the patched wall. You think telling me this will scare me off, she said. Kyle tilted his head slightly, the faintest edge of curiosity in his gaze. Will it? No, she admitted. It makes me want to know why you'd even offer me that choice. You've been trying to push me away since the moment you brought me here. His jaw worked, but he didn't look away. Because I don't trust fate. And that's what this is. Fate dressed as instinct. It burns hot and fast, and it leaves ashes behind. I've seen it before. Not with me, she said. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the truth of her words. Then slowly, he stood and crossed the space between them. When I saw you in that clearing, bound and left for the forest, I thought. He trailed off, searching for the word. I thought you were another death I'd have to bury. But you didn't beg. You didn't break. You met my eyes and you stayed standing. She felt her breath catch. And that changed something? It made me remember I'm not just here to survive, he said, voice low. That there are things worth keeping alive. The air between them tightened, thick with the pull she'd felt since the first night. Kale's hand lifted, brushing a lock of hair from her face. His touch was careful, almost tentative, as though he wasn't sure if she'd lean into it or pull away. Binding you would mark you forever, he murmured. Every wolf, every lichen, everything that walks these woods would smell it on you. It would tell them you belong to me, and that I'll kill for you. And if I say yes? She asked. His gaze deepened, molten gold catching the firelight. Then you stay, and we fight together until one of us stops breathing. Outside, a faint howl rose, distant but distinct, carrying across the snow like a thread of warning. Kale's head turned slightly, listening, his thumb still resting just below her jaw. They're testing the borders again, he said. Then maybe we shouldn't wait, Isla replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Kyle's eyes returned to hers, searching. You'd bind yourself to me without hesitation? I'd rather die beside you than live running from whatever's out there, she said. His expression shifted. Not quite relief, not quite victory, but something caught between the two. Then he stepped back, the space between them like a door closing before it could swing all the way open. Not tonight, he said. Frustration flared in her. Why? Because a bond is forged under the full moon, he explained. Anything less is a shadow of the real thing, and shadows don't hold against the dark. The rest of the night passed in a tense quiet. Kale kept watch by the window, his body a still, solid shape against the pale glow outside. Isla stayed by the fire, the weight of his words pressing heavy in her thoughts. She knew he was holding back, not just from her, but from himself. And she couldn't decide if the restraint was to protect her, or to keep himself from wanting something he thought he shouldn't have. Either way, the full moon was coming. And when it did, there would be no shadows left to hide in. Chapter 12. Moon on the horizon. The days that followed carried a strange tension, like the forest was holding its breath. The snow softened under a pale sun, but the quiet between Isla and Kale didn't thaw so easily. He still kept his distance, still watched the tree line with that sharp, calculating gaze, but she noticed his patterns changing. When he walked the perimeter, he lingered closer to the cabin. When he slept, if he slept, he stayed in the chair by the fire, as if putting his body between her and the door had become instinct. The full moon was 3 nights away. She could feel it in him before he even said the words. That morning, she found him outside splitting wood, his bare forearms glistening in the thin sunlight. Every strike of the axe was precise, controlled. She stood at the doorway for a while before speaking. "Do you get stronger before the moon?" He didn't stop working, but she saw the faint twitch of his mouth. "We get restless." She stepped into the snow, her boots crunching softly. "And you?" "You're more than restless." That earned her a glance, brief, but enough to catch the flare of gold in his eyes. "I'm trying to keep control. The closer the moon gets, the harder that becomes." They stacked the wood together, their breath visible in the cold air. She didn't miss the way he always positioned himself so she was nearest the cabin door, like he could shield her without her noticing. "Kale," she said quietly, "the night of the full moon, is that when the other packs will come?" "They'll try," he admitted. "The bond makes a statement. It draws a line they can't ignore. They'll want to test whether I can hold it. And if you don't bind me?" His jaw tightened. "Then they'll take you, and not for anything you'd survive." Back inside, the fire warmed the cabin, but the air still carried a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Isla sat at the table while Kale checked his weapons. A long knife with a silvered edge, a short-handled axe, a bow strung with black cord. "Do you always prepare this much for a full moon?" she asked. "This is less than I should," he replied, placing the knife within arm's reach of his chair. Her gaze lingered on the silver blade. "Does that work? On you?" "On all of us," he said without looking up. The words sat heavy in her chest. He spoke as if it were fact, nothing more, but she knew he'd thought about it. What it would take to end him. That night, the forest felt louder. Not in noise, but in presence. She could sense things moving far beyond the clearing, their weight pressing on the air. Kyle didn't sit. He paced, slow and deliberate, his gaze tracking the shadows beyond the windows. "They're circling," he murmured. She crossed to him, resting a hand on his arm before she could second-guess it. His muscles were taut beneath her fingers, coiled energy ready to snap. "Then let them circle," she said. "You're still here. And so am I." For a moment, something eased in his face. Not a smile, but the faint release of tension. "You shouldn't be trying to steady me," he said. "You should be afraid." "I am," she admitted, "but not of you." The following day passed in uneasy calm. The snow was beginning to crust over, the sky sharpening into that crystalline blue that always came before a cold snap. Kale left only once, disappearing into the trees for an hour and returning with fresh meat wrapped in cloth. He didn't explain where he'd been, and she didn't ask, though the scent of the forest clung to him stronger than before. That evening, they ate in near silence. She caught him watching her more than once, his gaze lingering on her hands, her throat, her eyes, as if memorizing something. "Kyle," she said after the plates were cleared, "when you bind me, how will it happen?" His expression darkened slightly, though not with anger. "It's not a ritual like humans think. There's no fire, no chanting. It's instinct. Blood, breath, and choice. Once it's done, there's no undoing it. And you've done it before? A long pause. Once. A long time ago. What happened? His eyes shifted, the gold dimming. She died. And I felt it. The weight in those words made her chest tighten. She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint shadow of old scars at the base of his throat. That's why you're afraid to do it again, she said softly. I'm not afraid, he replied, but his voice lacked its usual edge. I'm careful. There's a difference. And if being careful means losing me? His gaze met hers, sharp and unflinching. Then I'd rather live with the loss than feel you die. The conversation ended there, but the echo of it stayed between them into the night. Kyle kept watch as usual, but she noticed the way his hand rested near the silver knife, fingers curling around the hilt when a distant howl broke the quiet. She lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of what was coming. The full moon wasn't just a night, it was a choice. And she could feel Kale bracing himself to make it, even if she wasn't sure which way he'd decide. Outside, the forest waited. And somewhere out there, the other packs were waiting too. Chapter 13. The Moon's Demand. The night before the full moon felt wrong. The air was too still, the snow too bright under the high clouds, and every sound outside the cabin seemed to carry for miles. Kale had barely spoken all day, his attention fixed on the tree line as if expecting something to step out at any moment. He'd sharpened the silver blade twice already, the steady rasp of the whetstone filling the silence. Isla sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. You're wound tighter than I've ever seen you, she said finally. He didn't look up from the knife. They'll come tomorrow night. The full moon draws them like blood in the water. And you'll be ready, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I'm always ready, Kyle replied, sliding the blade back into its sheath. The question is whether you will be. She set the mug down, leaning forward. I've told you already, I'm not running. I'll face whatever's coming. His gaze lifted to hers, the gold in his eyes muted but still burning. You don't understand, Isla. When the moon is high, I'm not the same. The control I've kept around you, it frays. The wolf in me is louder. Then I'll remind you who you are, she said. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. That's not how it works. They ate a small meal in near silence, the fire crackling between them. Kyle moved around the cabin afterward, checking and rechecking the locks, the weapons, the wall he'd patched weeks ago. Kale, she said, stopping him near the door. If tomorrow is when they come, why wait to bind me? He froze, his hand still on the bolt. Because doing it without the moon's pull means it won't hold as strong. The forest respects what's done under its rules. But it would still protect me now, she pressed. His jaw tightened. Maybe. But it would mark you before you've had the chance to choose under the full moon's light. That choice should be yours when you feel everything. The pull, the instinct, the truth of what it means. She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint shadows under his eyes. And if I choose you tomorrow? The gold in his gaze deepened. Then you'll be mine in every way that matters. And the forest will know it. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. And if I don't? Then I'll still fight for you, he said. But you'll never truly be safe here. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. Kale crossed to the window, scanning the tree line. They're closer tonight, he murmured. She joined him, peering out. The forest looked empty, but she'd learned enough to know that didn't mean it was. Can they see us from out there? He didn't answer right away. Then softly, they can smell you. A shiver slid down her spine. Because of you? His lips pressed into a thin line. Because you're mine, whether the bond is sealed or not. They can sense the claim. They stayed near the fire that night, neither one truly relaxing. Isla could feel the weight of what was coming, pressing in with every hour that passed. "Tell me something," she said, breaking the silence. "Something real. Something you've never told anyone." Kyle's eyes flicked toward her. "Why?" "Because tomorrow might kill us," she said simply. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he leaned back in his chair, gaze fixed on the flames. "When I was young, before the curse fully took me, I thought I could choose the life I wanted. I thought I could outrun what I was. I learned the hard way that nothing in the forest forgets its own." "Is that why you live out here alone?" "That, and because I've buried too many who thought standing close to me was worth the cost." She swallowed hard. "You're afraid I'll end up like them?" "Yes." The word was simple, unflinching. "And you'd rather lose me than risk it." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Maybe I'm willing to take that risk." His gaze locked on hers, the gold in his eyes sparking hotter. "Don't say that unless you mean it, Isla, because once I take you into my world completely, there's no leaving it." A sound cut through the moment, faint but distinct, carried on the wind. A howl. Long, low, and too close. Kale was on his feet instantly, crossing to the weapons rack. "They're testing the border." Her pulse spiked. "Tonight?" "Not all of them," he said, sliding the silver knife into his belt. "Just scouts. But it means they're ready. Tomorrow won't be a test. It'll be a siege." She rose, her body tense. "Then we'll be ready too." He turned to face her, and something in his expression shifted. A mix of pride, fear, and something deeper that made her chest ache. "If you bind to me tomorrow, they'll have to go through both of us. But you need to understand, it won't be a ceremony. It'll be in the middle of the fight. Blood, chaos, no chance to think twice." "I'm not asking for twice," she said. The gold in his eyes flared, molten and sharp. "Then be ready, Isla. Because once the moon is high, there's no going back." That night, neither of them slept. The cabin felt smaller, the fire's light flickering over shadows that seemed to lean in closer. Outside, the forest waited, its silence deep enough to hear her own heartbeat. Tomorrow, the moon would rise. Tomorrow, she would choose. And whatever choice she made would change both their lives forever. Chapter 14. Blood and Moonlight. The moon rose huge and pale over the tree line, its light spilling across the snow like liquid silver. The air was sharp and electric, every breath tasting of iron and frost. Kale stood in the clearing, bare to the waist, his breath steady but his body wound tight. The golden in his eyes burned brighter than Isla had ever seen, catching the moon's glow until they looked like molten metal. Inside the cabin, she checked the silver knife for the third time. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she forced her hands to steady. Tonight wasn't just about survival. It was about the choice she'd promised to make. When Kale stepped back inside, the cold clung to him like a second skin. They're here. The first howl split the night, deep and resonant enough to vibrate through the floorboards. Then another. And another. "They'll come from all sides," Kale said, moving to the window. "They want to break the line before I can make the claim." She joined him, peering into the dark. Shadows shifted at the edge of the tree line. Too many to count. "How long do we have?" she asked. His gaze never left the forest. "Not long enough." The attack began with movement so fast it blurred. Shapes bursting from the trees, snow spraying under heavy. Pause. Kale moved before she could blink, the ripple of his shift flowing through him until the man she knew was gone, replaced by the towering black-furred Lycan with the silver streak. He met the first wave head-on, claws flashing, teeth bared in a snarl that shook the air. Isla stayed near the door, slashing at anything that broke past him with the silver blade. Blood hit the snow, dark against the white. Kale fought like the forest itself had given him its strength, every movement a blend of raw power and precision. But there were too many. A massive shape slammed into Kale's side, forcing him down into the snow. He roared, twisting to throw it off, but another was already moving toward the cabin, toward her. Isla's grip tightened on the knife. "Not a chance," she muttered, stepping forward. She met the creature halfway, ducking under its swipe and driving the blade deep into its side. It screamed, a horrible, guttural sound, before collapsing in the snow. When she looked up, Kale was staring at her, golden eyes burning even through the chaos. In 3 strides, he was at her side, the battle raging around them. Now, his voice growled in her head, not spoken but felt. "If you choose me, choose now." The world seemed to narrow to the space between them, the moon's light pouring over his fur, the scent of blood and pine heavy in the air. "I choose you," she said, the words steady despite the pounding in her chest. Kale's claws nicked his own palm, dark blood welling. He pressed it to the shallow cut she made across her own hand, their blood mixing, warm and hot all at once. The bond hit like lightning. She felt it in her bones, a pull, deep and ancient, something more than magic, more than instinct. It wasn't just a tether, it was a merging, his heartbeat slamming into hers, her breath sinking to his. The forest felt it too. She could feel it, the shift in the air, the way the attackers faltered, growling uncertainly as if the moon itself had marked her now. Kale's voice in her mind was different now, deeper, threaded with something that belonged to both of them. "Mine." "Yours," she answered without hesitation. They fought together after that, a single force. When one lunged at her, Kale was already there, claws sinking deep before it could touch her. When one leapt for his blind side, she drove the silver blade home. The pack broke under their defense, retreating into the shadows, their howls fading into the distance. The snow was torn and red, the air heavy with the scent of blood and the lingering weight of the bond. Kale shifted back slowly, breath ragged, blood streaking his skin. His hand found hers, the one still marked from the cut, and closed around it. "It's done," he said, his voice low but steady. She met his gaze, the gold in his eyes softer now, but no less intense. "I know." "You're not afraid?" She shook her head. "Not of you. Not anymore." Outside, the moon hung high, silver and watchful. The forest was quiet again, its borders holding. Kyle stepped closer, his forehead resting briefly against hers. "Then we'll face whatever comes next, together." They stood in the moonlight, blood and snow beneath their feet, the bond thrumming between them, unbreakable, undeniable. The fight was over, but the story between them had only just begun.